Hello, my creative friends. Well, tonight it's Tuesday Draw Along and Painting One, and I'm going to be doing this little angel, Happy Thanksgiving angel. I like doing these little storybook drawings every once in a while, and this one seemed perfect for Thanksgiving. For those who are a part of the sketchbook membership, for those who would like to have a little bit of help drawing, you could always go over and check out my Ko-fi sketchbook. It's very reasonably priced, easy to join. That's where you're going to find the line drawings for all of the drawings that I do and paintings I do for my Ko-fi membership is going to be fine there for my YouTube channel. Now tonight I was conflicted about what I was going to do, if I wanted to do watercolor, acrylic, mixed media. I wasn't for sure. I settled on watercolor, and I'll tell you why. Because watercolor, I can, when a time crunch especially, I could take out a box of colors and have all of these, take out a few brushes, have a paper towel, and I'm ready to go, especially if I can trace this drawing. I don't even have to draw it. I can just go ahead. Once I create it, it's ready to go. But I do love creating the little mixed media pieces as well. This is some of the ones that I've done in the past. And how you would do this, and you could do this as well, is you take some deli paper, tracing paper. I was using deli paper for my palettes, but deli paper is sandwich paper. It kind of works like a tracing paper type of a quality where it's semi-opaque. You could lay that over your drawing, trace around the elements. So like here, I did her shirt and her blouse and her dress, and the little kitties are in there as well. And the little paper houses, and I did a watercolor background, acrylic on her face. So you can combine some of the things. This one as well, this has some paper elements, some and then painted over. These are papers. These are all watercolor in here, and then drawn over a watercolor background and some mixed media items in there too. That's the same way. I just made little patterns over the top of what I have here. It's rather like quilting, and then went ahead and painted it. But tonight I am on limited amount of time. So what I wanted to do was take a quick art break, and that means I'm going to just do her in a watercolor. Now my favorite watercolor paper is the Canson watercolor paper. If you're just starting out new with watercolor, I always suggest spend a tiny bit more money on your watercolor paper, and then buy whatever watercolors that you can find. So these are just happen to be a student grade set, and I do have another one. You don't have to necessarily spend a lot of money on your watercolor, and actually for a few years I just used Crayola markers. So it's not so much the quality of the watercolor when you're first starting, of course. Spend a tiny bit more on your paper, but you don't have to do 100% cotton. You can start with a student grade and work your way from there. Well, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start with my inner items here, and then I usually save the background as my last when I'm doing watercolor. So I'm just going to start here with my face colors with watercolor. If you're new to watercolor, and I know there's some new people who have joined my sketchbook membership. If you're new to watercolor, it's a little different than acrylic paint. You start light and bright and then work your way darker. Now there is not a lot of, there's some challenges with watercolor. We don't necessarily get the opportunity to change things as easily. I apologize for any background noise. My husband and I are sharing the workshop space tonight. He's over there doing some wood cutting, and I'm in my art studio space. But as I was saying, you're going to start light and bright and then work your way dark. It's with watercolor, you're basically painting the shadows. So I'm going to do my lightest color, and then I'm going to be working with my darkest. Now watercolor always wants to travel where the paper is wet. So if I come in here and do this little area here, say this is this orange color here, that color is only going to stay right where my paper is wet, and it's not going to travel into my other areas. So that's a little different too. So even though I have it wet in that area, it's not going to travel. Now if I add water to that area, it's going to move right along. Well, I'm going to be starting this. You're going to see me do a lot of the same techniques in a lot of different areas. I'm going to be laying my lighter colors in, giving those areas a chance to dry, and then coming in with my next colors. I usually like to do at least 2, perhaps 3 colors to give the shadowing and build my picture that way. So I'm going to go ahead, stop talking. I'll speed it on up so you can watch, and I'll come back in forth when I need to talk about a few other things. Okay, let's get started.
layering the watercolor, there's two different ways you can do it, or two ways that are very common anyway. You can go on directly onto dry paper and put your color on, or you can do a wet on wet blend, which is what I'm doing with that darker shade of orange. I put my lightest shade of orange on, and then while my paper was still wet in that color area, I layered in a darker shade of orange, creating that subtle graduation from dark until light. It's a great way to add those variances in color. It's got a very beautiful watercolor look, and it's a great technique to use in so many of the areas. You'll see me do that often, where I'm going to be laying down a color, and when that color is wet, still in that area, I'm going to be applying another one. Layering your colors, it's important to keep in mind that you're not wanting to cover up necessarily everything you just put on. Those lightest colors that you put on, those are your highlights, and the next layers you're putting on are your shadows. So keep in mind when you're laying your colors, where's your darkest areas and where are your lighter ones, and make sure you're leaving a little bit of those bright and light colors showing through. I took in consideration that this little harvest angel was going to have a lot of orange in this picture, so the pop of color that I chose was going to be more of this aqua, kind of a lighter shade of blue. It's the perfect little complementary color to that orange color. It's just a nice pop of color. So when you're choosing your colors for your harvest angel, if you're using other ones, take a look at what the complementary color might be to those colors. So, for example, the complementary color to green is red, the complementary color to yellow is purple. So those are some of the things to keep in mind when you're choosing your brightest pop of color. You might want to choose something that's complementary or opposite on the color wheel. The flesh tone I'm using for this little angel is one that's already pre-mixed in my box. I'm just using kind of a light flesh tone, but I've often tweaked my colors once I have the first layers in. I often add maybe just a little bit of rusty tones or brown, red-brown tones to her skin. I build up the layers slowly and get to where I want my colors. So watercolor dries lighter, so what you're seeing in the wet version is going to be drying slightly lighter. So it's important to do layers and just add your layers as you go so it doesn't get too dark right away. I'm also adding a little bit of blush tones on her cheek and on her nose as well while my colors are still wet, and that will just kind of have a soft little rosy touch in the end. Since this is basically just a fun painting for fun, I mix and match my paints easily. I'm fine with using a student grade and then splashing a little bit more professional grade. I'm basically just wanting the colors. So I look in my boxes and I choose the colors that I want and layer those. Like I said earlier, when you're first starting, it really doesn't matter the grade of watercolor you're using. Just buy what you can afford and just practice and see how your paint and your water reacts when you put them on your paper together. When painting my hair, I started with a rusty tone first and then was going to be adding the darker shades of brown on top. It always looks great if you have more than one color in your hair, so choose a color. If it's blonde, go to maybe your lightest golds or maybe perhaps even just a slight bit of the browns. Water down. The more water you have in your color, the lighter your watercolor will be. The less water you have in your watercolor, the more darker it's going to be. So you could use the same color and get a variety of hues of that color by just simply tweaking the color of water. The more water you have, the lighter your color will be. The less water you have, the darker your color will be. So play around with it and see what you like. Because I chose to use more of a harmonious color pattern on my Harvest Angel, most of the colors are in the orangish reds and the golds, I needed to make sure I had plenty of contrast in my areas. So where the arms were, they're going to be lighter, so it looks like they're separate from the body. And then my body of my dress or my apron was going to be a different color. It's important to have contrast, so make sure your colors are lighter and darker in those areas. It's just going to add a whole nother layer of depth into your painting. You can even see where I put the pumpkin in her arms. I needed to make sure my oranges were a slightly different shade than her dress. It's all the same, it'll just blend in. So I needed to add a little bit more rust to my pumpkin to make the contrast happen. For the field colors, I just chose some nice warm shades of green. I had some sitting on the side of my palette, and I just chose to alternate in between those two colors. On the very front one where the pumpkins were, I chose to go around my pumpkins first and then let my greens dry and add my layers, and then I went back and did my pumpkins. For my greens, I layered in kind of more of the olive shades of green and then went in and just picked up a rusty brown color and added that little bit of dimension there. It's a wet on wet technique. I let my colors just blend as they will, and I'll come back in the end and add a few more details of the striping and the pattern on the hills. I wanted to create two that were kind of similar in color, and then that one in the middle I switched up my color of green just to give my field colors a little bit more interest. To add a little bit of interest into that foreground, I decided to put a squash in there just of a different shape besides just all pumpkins. Since she's carrying a pumpkin, I didn't want to necessarily have all the pumpkins on the ground, so I ended up adding that little bit of a pear shape and then switched up the colors for making it a squash. I thought it looked kind of good, and I liked all the little extra design on the fields and adding the patterns there. There is that little tiny bird on the top. I decided to go ahead and make it a red bird and then add a little bit of the black for the beak. I had a few little accents of black like on her shoes and the ties on her hair ribbons and a little bit of it on her hands as well. So I thought this would be a good place to carry some of that color. I always like to add some of my colors around my picture, so if I add a little black somewhere, I need to add it in another place as well. I decided decided I would make them a similar color to what her flesh tone was. A little bit lighter, and then I made the star in the inside more of that rusty color, close to her hair color. I knew I was going to be making the background kind of a light blue color to be that complementary color to all those oranges, so I thought the light wings would be the best solution. Before I started my background, I gave my piece a quick dry just to make sure all my colors were dry and nothing would be lifted so easily at this process. I am doing this painting fairly quick, so there's not a lot of dry time in between my color paintings, and the color still would be able to be lifted quite easily if I get too much water and I scrub too much in one area. So I gave it a nice dry, and now I'm just putting on my background. I wanted it light and bright, so I'm just using a little bit of color as I'm going across my background. Once I had my piece dried, I knew I wanted to add a few more details, so I went back in with my pencil and did a few more line works just to create some patterns and to strengthen some lines. I came in with my Kimberly 9XXB pencil. Some of these little mixed media pencils will be listed in the description. There'll be links there if you'd like to click on them and just see what they were all about if you would like to buy them for yourself. I'm also going to be adding a little bit of my Sharpie China marker. The soft quality of white that the Sharpie China marker makes. It's got a little bit of a crayon feel to it. It's not as bright white as some of the other pens. It's just a perfect way to add a subtle shade of white. I'm also going to be adding some glitter gel pens. These ones happen to be a little bit sparkly, and it's a super fun detail to be able to add to your paintings. I believe I purchased these at Walmart. They're fairly inexpensive. The only thing about the gel pens that you need to keep in mind is that they do take a little bit longer to dry, so make sure you keep a track of where your hand is so you don't smear your gel pens across your picture. Incorporate mark making into your paintings, the more you're going to come up with your own original line work that you like to create for yours. I like to scribble, so I'm a scribbler, but you might like more detailed patterns in yours. So the more you do it, experiment a little bit more, and you're going to find out what suits you. I do a few more scribbles and then I call her done. If you're new to my channel and you like to do art and crafts, come on over and see what I have to offer. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. If you'd like to leave a comment, let me know if you'd like to do acrylic, watercolor, or mixed media, or all of the above. Well, thanks for hanging out with me this evening, and hopefully you'll come back and see me again, and next time you'll create right along with me.